Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 619, and today is June 20th, 2024. I'm the host of the show, Kyle Anzalone. We got several news stories to get through on today's show, but first, before I get to that, I want to remind everybody where they could share the show, subscribe to the show, find the show, and of course, support my work. So the show is hosted through the Libertarian Institute, where I am the news editor. We repost the show on the blog at antiwar.com, where I am the opinion editor. We post the show, the video version, on YouTube, Rumble, and Odysee, so you can subscribe at any of those channels. Of course, if you're listening on YouTube or watching on YouTube, go ahead and hit the notification bell. If you don't do that, the algorithm is going to suppress us. And so hit the notification bell. Occasionally we do break through the algorithm, and we have a show that does extremely well. But most of the time, we just kind of get lost in the weeds on YouTube. Most people listen to the show through the audio version, so I do try to make it always audio friendly. You can subscribe to this show anywhere you can listen to audio podcasts. And of course, the best place to follow all my work, shows, articles, everything I do is on my Twitter account at @KyleAnzalone_. We've been growing at a pretty rapid clip so far in 2024. So if you haven't subscribed or followed me on Twitter already, go ahead and head on over to Eds and do that. Let's get into the show today. First up here, we have one from our good friend Will Porter. Putin visits North Korea to discuss security pact. Russian President Vladimir Putin traveled to North Korea for his first day visit to that country in more than 20 years. The two sides will hold talks covering a new comprehensive security deal, closer trade ties, and other sensitive issues, according to the Kremlin. Putin touched down in Pyongyang on Tuesday, greeted by a delegation headed by North Korean Supreme Leader Kim Jong-un. He will remain in the country for 2 days, during which he will hold a marathon of meetings with Kim and other senior officials. Also worth noting that Putin is heading to Vietnam after he's done in Korea. Ahead of the visit, Putin published an article in North Korea's state-run media vowing to boost cooperation across several areas while hailing the DPRK's, that's North Korea's official's name, strong support for the Russian war effort in Ukraine. So he wrote, "We are ready for close cooperation to make international relations more democratic and more stable. To do this, we will develop alternative mechanisms for trade and mutual settlement, as well as that are not controlled by the West, and jointly resist illegitimate unilateral restrictions, at the same time to build an architecture to equal and indivisible security in Eurasia." And, while China does have the largest border with North Korea, it is worth noting that there is a direct border between North Korea and Russia. So Putin went on to condemn the United States as a global neo-colonial dictatorship based on double standards, adding that Washington views a natural and legitimate desire for independence and autonomy as a threat to its dominance of the world. All right, so a day later, I put out this write-up at antiwar.com with a little bit more details about what actually happened during Putin's visit. Russia and North Korea signed mutual assistance pact, June 19th, antiwar.com. So I write, on the first leg of a trip abroad, Russian President Vladimir Putin signed a new mutual assistance agreement with North Korea. Moscow and Pyongyang's ties have surged after the U.S. attempt to isolate Russia in response to the invasion of Ukraine. According to the Russian state news agency TASS, Putin and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un signed what they called a comprehensive strategic partnership agreement and several other important documents. The outline said the deal goes beyond the military sphere and includes trade and other forms of cooperation between the two neighbors. And so there was space, technology, science, medicine, sports, all these things, cultural, are all listed on the kinds of treaties and deals they're doing. So while I think this is still the case, I haven't looked around this morning to double check, but I don't think the details of the agreement are public, and I'm not sure they're going to be made public. Putin explained that it provides, among other things, for the provision of mutual assistance in the event of aggression against one of the parties to this document. Kim labeled the deal a very robust treaty. So Washington has lashed out against Pyongyang over the past several years, alleging North Korea has supplied munitions to Russia for use in Ukraine. It is unclear if the DPRK will interpret the war in Ukraine as aggression that would trigger some form of mutual assistance. North Korea often defines U.S. and South Korean war games on the Korean Peninsula as acts of aggression. Washington and its NATO allies conducted similar drills in Eastern Europe and Ukraine prior to the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Ahead of his arrival in Pyongyang on Tuesday, Putin published an article in a North Korean newspaper thanking the country for its strong support for the Russian war efforts in Ukraine. So he wrote, "We are also ready for close cooperation to make international relations more democratic and stable." And we read that last quote in the other article. Putin will wrap up his visit to North Korea on Wednesday and then head for Vietnam. His international travel is in defiance of Washington's goal to isolate Moscow on the global stage. Prior to his arrival in Hanoi, Putin published an op-ed in Vietnamese media praising the government for its balanced and pragmatic stance on Ukraine. The Russian president is expected to meet with the Vietnamese leadership on Thursday. So if there is any significant details from that meeting, I would expect that we will discuss those either on Friday's or Monday's show. All right, next up here, this article I wrote for antiwar.com on the 19th. U.S. reaffirms ironclad support for Philippines after China boat ramming. So America's top diplomat reaffirmed the U.S. commitment to a mutual defense pact with the Philippines after a Chinese vessel rammed a Filipino ship in the South China Sea. Tensions between the People's Republic of China and Manila have escalated as the Philippines has increased military ties with the U.S. The Philippines military reported on Monday a Chinese craft rammed a Philippine ship in an area of the South China Sea claimed by both Beijing and Manila. The Philippine Army claimed that the Chinese attacked with swords and knives while its soldiers were unarmed. One Filipino lost a thumb in the exchange. U.S. Ambassador to the Philippines, Mary Kay Carlson, immediately denounced Beijing for the incident. In a post on X, she blamed China for aggressive, dangerous maneuvers near the Second Thomas Shoal, which caused bodily injury, damaged Philippine vessels, and hindered lawful maritime operations. On Wednesday, Secretary of State Antony Blinken held a call with the Philippines Foreign Secretary on the matter. According to a State Department readout of the call, Blinken says China's actions undermine regional peace and stability and underscores the United States' ironclad commitments to the Philippines under our Mutual Defense Treaty. Throughout the Biden administration, top U.S. officials have invoked the 1953 U.S.-Philippines Mutual Defense Treaty as a warning to China to back off territorial disputes with Manila. Tensions between Manila and Beijing in the South China Sea have escalated since Philippines President Ferdinand Marcos Jr., also known as Bongbong, took office 2 years ago. He has since increased military ties with the U.S. Recently, the U.S. deployed a Typhoon launcher, which is a covert missile system concealed in a 40-foot shipping container and fires Tomahawk and SM-6 missiles, to the Philippines for war games. The Chinese Defense Ministry spokesperson, Wu Quang, said that the deployment increased the risk of conflict. The U.S. and Philippines practices put the entire region under the fire of the United States and brought huge risk to the region, Wu explained. Intermediate range missiles are strategic and offensive weapons with a strong Cold War color. And so this is, something when we talk about China and when people talk and think about potential conflict with China, really the issue is always surrounding Taiwan, because that is something that Americans have been conditioned to believe that is so important that if we're not, backing the Taiwanese, then China's going to take over and that'll be bad for democracy and freedom and semiconductors. And, we have all kinds of reasons for why we want to back the Taiwan. But then when it comes to the Philippines, it's not really that we're talking about China invading the Philippines. We're talking about fishing waters and trade routes and things like this in the South China Sea. We're talking about the second Thomas Shoal is a reef that's very close to the, surface of the water. And what the Philippines did is they beached a World War II ship on that reef, and then they have to go resupply it because, of course, the ship is stuck there. But that's what they use for their territorial claims to the South China Sea. Now, Beijing also has very ambitious territorial claims to the South China Sea, but at the same time, it's not like we're talking about China going in and annexing major parts of the Philippines or something like that. So I think for the American people, and when we're talking about ramping up the hostility in America for war with China, this issue really just doesn't apply. In fact, I think if people were to look and read my article, they would think maybe it's kind of silly because a sword fight happened and somebody lost a thumb. Nobody died, everybody's gonna be okay, and it sounds like something that you would imagine in the Caribbean a few centuries ago, where you essentially have like two groups of people, fighting with swords between ships. And so yeah, I don't think this is the kind of thing that's really gets the Americans' interest in increasing war with China, and so there's less U.S. media attention paid to it, and it really goes unnoticed how close and how much the situation has escalated in the South China Sea under the Biden administration, in part because he's aiding a genocide in Gaza and waging a proxy war against Russia in Ukraine. But this is extremely dangerous, and while we have provoked China over Taiwan as well, it's very important to note that we keep telling China that we will go to war with you over these reefs and territorial claims in the South China Sea. It's, very dangerous times all over the world, but not just in the East China Sea, but in the South China Sea. All right, next up here, article I wrote for antiwar.com, June 19th, White House scraps U.S.-Israel meeting after Netanyahu slams Washington. So the White House canceled a high-level U.S. meeting with Israeli officials after Prime Minister Netanyahu slammed the Biden administration for delaying arms transfers to Tel Aviv. The Israeli leader said he needed the arms to finish the job in Gaza. On Wednesday, Axios reported that Israeli and U.S. officials said the White House was, quote, enraged by a video that Netanyahu posted the day before. The Israeli officials were en route to Washington when the Biden administration canceled the meeting. In the 1-minute video in English, the Israeli Prime Minister blasted the Biden administration for withholding support. He said, when Secretary Blinken was recently here in Israel, I had a candid conversation. I said I deeply appreciate the support the U.S. has given Israel from the beginning of the war, but I also said something else. I said it is inconceivable that in the past few months the administration has been withholding weapons and ammunition to Israel. After the video was posted to X, U.S. officials said they were unaware of what arms shipments Netanyahu was even referring to. This is Secretary of State Antony Blinken's response to it. We, as you know, are continuing to review one shipment that the President Biden has talked about with regards to 2,000-pound bombs because our concerns about their use in a densely populated area like Rafah, Blinken explained, but everything else is moving as it normally would move, and again, with perspective of making sure that Israel has what it needs to defend itself against this multiplicity of challenges. The statement from America's top diplomat is in sharp contrast with Netanyahu's remarks, in which he claimed that he personally spoke with Blinken about the issue. He said, Secretary Blinken assured me that the administration is working day and night to remove these blots. I certainly hope that is the case. It should be the case. So, Tel Aviv has now elaborated on Netanyahu's claims on the weapons shipment delays. One advisor to the prime minister referred the media to speak with Washington. So while this has been the public response, there is this meeting behind the scenes. So Axios reported the Iran meeting was canceled to show Netanyahu that his actions have consequences. A U.S. official told the outlet, this decision makes it clear there are consequences for pulling such stunts. And I just want to highlight here that I don't think this is a really big consequence, that I'm sure this meeting will happen sometime in the future, that, while we say it's canceled, it was a meeting of the Iran Strategic Dialogue, which is this, kind of coalition between the U.S. and Israel that meets, I think, every few months, not every few weeks. And so my guess is that this meeting was just, either this one was canceled, but we're still going to hold the one in July or August, or we're going to bump this meeting to July and we'll have one in July and August when we normally wouldn't have had one until August or something like that. I don't think that this was going to be a major breakdown in any way of the U.S.-Israel relationship. But at the same time, the U.S. doesn't do this. The Biden administration hasn't imposed any consequences on Israel. And so you do wonder maybe how far this will spiral, how the Israelis are going to react to it, and what comes from that. Now, I didn't see a major response from Israel, and according to Axios, that there are Israeli officials that understand that what Netanyahu did really provoked Biden. And so, to try to figure out why Netanyahu did this, I'm a little bit stumped, although I have maybe one idea. And the only thing I could think of is it has to do with the debate that's coming up between Biden and Trump. And he actually wants to create division between himself and Joe Biden because he knows that Donald Trump will then take a harder position and will have more room to take a harder position against Biden on Israel. And so if Biden just gives Netanyahu everything he wants and there's no rifts between Israel and the U.S. as Biden is president, then Trump can't go to the debate and say, well, if I were president, I would be even more supportive of Israel, because Biden has essentially given Israel a blank check, billions, tens of billions of U.S. dollars, security, cover for what he's doing. We spent hundreds of millions of dollars on an aid pier that didn't even work to get political and propaganda cover to Israel. We're dropping aid crates on Gaza to cover for the fact that Israel won't let aid in through the humanitarian crossings, and those are crushing people to death. We have absolutely destroyed our standing in the world for Israel to cover for their genocidal actions in Gaza, and yet holding up like a 2,000-pound bomb is something that creates enough difference between Israel and Washington that the tensions can then expand, and Trump really then has a lot of room to attack Biden on the debate stage. So I don't know, maybe I'm playing too much 3D chess here, and you guys think I'm going a little far, a little conspiratorial, but it's kind of hard to figure out why Netanyahu would do this when in reality, Biden set a red line in, I believe, March or April that said that if Israel attacked Gaza, or Rafah, without a plan for what to do with the civilians there, which really wasn't that big of a bar to hit, right? You just have to have a plan for what to do with the civilians. If Israel did that without having a plan, then we would cut off aid shipments to Israel. And Israel went ahead, they carried out that attack, they've destroyed most of the city of Rafah now. They said they've killed like 500 members of Hamas. I'm sure that's not even true. Doesn't even seem like that many, since they said there were 4 brigades to crush there. So as this has happened, the White House has just said all along that this doesn't violate our red line. We don't assess this violated our red line. It hasn't been that far yet. So why would Israel do this if, it could potentially maybe provoke Biden to say, well, you are violating this red line, I will cut off weapons. My guess is it has to do something with the political conversation in the United States. So Biden sent his envoy to the Middle East, Amos Hochstein, to deliver the message to Netanyahu personally. According to Axios, Hochstein is in the middle. Hochstein told Netanyahu that his actions were unacceptable and that the U.S. wasn't sure what he was talking about. So Hochstein is in the Middle East attempting to reduce tensions between Israel and Hezbollah. He is reportedly pessimistic about Washington's ability to prevent Israeli invasion of Lebanon. And there's been some other reporting on that since I wrote this article. I will have a guest on the next episode of the show for Friday's episode where we're going to get into that a little bit more. But just for a little bit of detail as far as it relates to Gaza, it seems that for the past I would say 3 weeks since Biden announced the Israeli ceasefire deal, which was really Washington's ceasefire deal on May 31st. It seems that the White House was first really leaning on Egypt and Qatar to push Hamas to accept that deal. And when they essentially ran out of room to push those countries, then they went to Hezbollah, and now they're telling the leadership of Lebanon, so that would be the Sunni leadership of the country, but this is meant as a message to Nasrallah, the head of Hezbollah. What they want is they want to say to the Lebanese, look, we're getting to the point where Israel is about to invade. And the only way to stop the Israeli invasion is to stop the fighting along the border. And the only way to stop the fighting along the border is to stop the fighting in Gaza. And so I think, and this is laid out in an article in Middle East Eye, what the White House is hoping for is that Hezbollah has enough leverage over Hamas, or maybe Hezbollah will go to the Iranians and plead with them and get Tehran to put leverage on. I have no idea how they expect this to work, because I don't think Hezbollah has that much direct influence over Hamas, but I do think what they're hoping for is that Hezbollah is so threatened by the impending Israeli invasion that they pressure Hamas to take a deal in Gaza, so then we could have a ceasefire not only in southern Israel but also in northern Israel. I mean, I think this is a completely convoluted plan, but also the administration spent the first 8 months of this conflict trying to talk to the Saudis, getting them to normalize relations with Israel in the midst of this genocide in order to get the Saudis to rebuild Gaza after this is all done. All right, so I wrap up my article here. While the White House scrapped the Iran strategic dialogue meeting between the U.S. and Israel, high-level meetings will continue as planned. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan will still meet with his Israeli counterpart. Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant is also scheduled to visit the U.S. early next week, Israeli officials told Axios. Gallant, along with Netanyahu, is facing a potential arrest warrant for war crimes from the International Criminal Court. Tel Aviv and Washington has used the Iran strategic dialogue in recent months to express displeasure with each other. In March, Israel pulled out of a meeting over a U.S. Security Council vote on Gaza. All right, next up here. IDF, Netanyahu's goal of eliminating Hamas is unachievable. So the spokesperson for the Israeli military explained that Prime Minister Netanyahu's goal of eradicating Hamas is not achievable. The statement comes amid a growing rift between the Israeli leader and the military. So in remarks to Israel's Channel 13 News on Wednesday, Rear Admiral Daniel Hagari said the military spokesperson explained that the prime minister's stated objective in Gaza is an insult to the Israeli people. He said, this business of destroying Hamas, making Hamas disappear, it's simply throwing sand in the eyes of the public. Hamas is an idea. Hamas is a party. It's rooted in the hearts of the people. Whoever thinks we can eliminate Hamas is wrong. And so this is a really bold statement. Now, we have had the Israeli intelligence community come out with assessments saying that though the campaign in Gaza is going to drive recruitment to Hamas, effectively saying that, you really can't defeat an insurgency this way. At the same time, and this statement is very bold and direct. So the statement reflects assessments from the U.S. intelligence and military officials that destroying Hamas is not something that can be accomplished. The U.S. intelligence community's threat assessment released in March said that Israel would likely be fighting Hamas for years to come. And of course, in November, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Charles Q. Brown, laid out that Israel was going to drive more Palestinians to take up arms against them by their ruthless onslaught in Gaza. So Netanyahu's office responded to the remarks by saying that the prime minister's ends in Gaza remain unchanged. The statement said, Netanyahu has defined the destruction of Hamas's military and governing capabilities as one of the goals of the war. The Israeli military, of course, is committed to this. It's not the first time that Netanyahu has clashed with members of his military in recent days. On Sunday, the Israeli Defense Forces, IDF, announced a limited pause to operations in select areas of Rafah during daylight hours to allow more aid to reach the Palestinians. Netanyahu quickly denounced the move as, quote, unachievable, unacceptable. Other divides have emerged within the Israeli government. Last week, former IDF General Benny Gantz withdrew from the war cabinet over Netanyahu's refusal to work out a hostage release agreement. Gantz's exit led Netanyahu to dissolve the war cabinet. Another source of friction is a potential law that would have removed the Israeli Orthodox community's exemption from mandatory military service. The controversial measure is becoming an issue for Netanyahu, who demands his political partners get a grip and abandon petty politics. He said, "We are at war on several fronts. We face great challenges and difficult decisions. We must all focus solely on the task before us, defeating Hamas, returning all of our hostages, and returning our residents safely to their homes, both in the north and the south." Israel is waging a tit-for-tat war with Hezbollah, as well as operations in Gaza and the West Bank, which are expected to last at least another 5 weeks. U.S. officials are concerned that Tel Aviv will start a wider war with Hezbollah that will grow to include Washington. Some analysts believe Netanyahu sees Tel Aviv remaining in state of war as key to his political survival, as he faces intense public scrutiny over the ongoing war, the failure to prevent Hamas's surprise attack last year, and the multiple corruption scandals, among other controversies. All right, this one is from, I wrote for antiwar.com on June 19th. UN, Israeli authorities responsible for crimes against humanity. So speaking to the UN Security Council, the head of an investigative body probing the war in Gaza found Israeli officials committed war crimes during military operations in the Strip. So Navi Pillay, chairperson of the Independent International Commission of Inquiry on the Occupied Palestinian Territory, announced her findings to the UNSC on Wednesday, stating that the commission had concluded that Israeli authorities are responsible for war crimes, crimes against humanity, and violations of international humanitarian and human rights law. She explained those crimes include extermination, intentionally directing attacks against civilians and civilian objects, murder or willful killing using starvation as a method of war, forcible transfer, gender persecution, sexual and gender-based violence amounting to torture and or cruel humanitarian treatment. The commission noted that Hamas has committed similar crimes throughout the latest conflict. During the 8-month assault on Gaza, the Israeli Defense Forces have killed over 37,000 Palestinians and injured an estimated 85,000. Israeli bombings have also destroyed most of Gaza's homes, schools, mosques, hospitals, and farmland. Hundreds of thousands of Palestinians have been plunged into near-famine conditions. Tel Aviv's onslaught has been aided by a long list of U.S. weapons. A separate report from the UN Human Rights Office published on Wednesday documented 6 cases of Israel using American bombs to kill hundreds of civilians. The report states that U.S.-made GBU 31 bombs, which are 2,000 pounds, GBU 32 bombs, which are 1,000 pounds, and GBU 39 bombs, which are 250 pounds, were used to strike residential buildings, a school, a refugee camp, and a market between October and December of 2023. The UN Rights Office observed 218 deaths from those 6 attacks and said it had indications that the number of fatalities could be much higher. Pillay explained that the independent commission determined the Israeli strikes were intentional. She said, "We found that immense number of civilian casualties in Gaza and widespread destruction of civilian objects and infrastructure were the inevitable result of intentional strategy to cause maximum damage." The commission found that Israel's crimes went beyond using bombs and other conventional weapons, but also food, water, and dispossession as weapons of war. Tel Aviv has also forcibly transferred much of Gaza's small population into small enclosures that the commission say are unsafe and uninhabitable. Pillay also notes that Tel Aviv has engaged in unprecedented violence in the West Bank since October 7th, but those crimes have received little attention due to the near daily atrocities committed in Gaza. All right. Last article on Israel here. Israel touts record weapon exports in 2023. So the Israeli Defense Ministry announced that for the third straight year, Tel Aviv has set a new record for weapons exports. Israel sold $13 billion in arms last year, with India being the largest importer. In a statement on Monday, the ministry touted Tel Aviv's ability to distribute munitions around the globe. It wrote, for the third consecutive year, Israel set a new record in defense exports with over $13 billion in 2023, the highest figure to date. Israel's defense exports have doubled within 5 years, with over a third of the agreement signed missile, rocket, and air defense systems. The statement concluded, Israel's defense industry signed hundreds of significant contracts with help and support of the Israel Ministry of Defense, including mega deals amounting to hundreds of millions of dollars. The report includes missile, rockets, electronic warfare, radar systems, weapon launchers, drones, and ammunition. At $13 billion, Israel is the world's 9th largest arms dealer, according to the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, SPIRI. India was the top importer of Israeli weapons during the same period, purchasing nearly $1 billion in gear. The SPIRI research found the Philippines and the U.S. were Israel's second and third largest arms recipients, respectively. Haaretz notes that the SPIRI report is not comprehensive, and Israel has conducted weapon sales with Azerbaijan that go undocumented by the International Arms Watchdog, and in fact, these sales may be even larger than the sales to Israel, so the number could be significantly higher than $13 billion. Tel Aviv's record year came as the Israeli Defense Forces rampaged through Gaza, killing thousands of Palestinians with razing much of the enclave. Israel has a legacy of testing its new or experimental weapons on Palestinians before selling them around the world. The Israeli atrocities in Gaza have led some countries to halt arms purchases from Tel Aviv, including Colombia. The U.S. has also withheld a single shipment of 2,000-pound bombs from Israel over the use of heavy munitions in civilian areas of the Strip, but of course we've given them everything else. All right, wrapping up here with the article from Jason Ditz. Israeli drone strike slays military officer in South Syria. And so, got this crazy dynamic here where typically the United States would be denouncing it if a country was attacking essentially all of its neighbors. Israel is waging military operations in Gaza, in the West Bank, in Lebanon, in Syria, and yet, nope, it's just always poor Israel needs to defend itself and we'll give them everything they need to make that possible. So, Israeli drones carried out strikes in Quantara and Dara, both in southern Syria this morning, causing material damage to military targets. One of the strikes reportedly killed a Syrian military officer. Israel, as usual, did not comment on this, as its policy is not to comment on attacks initially reported in foreign media. Syrian state media confirmed the incident. Israeli attacks Syria on a fairly regular basis, and despite nominally being neutral in the ongoing Syrian civil war, the preponderance of attacks against the Syrian government and military targets, and of course this has been going on for well over a decade now, and so Israel has played one of, if not the I can't say the largest, but maybe behind Russia, the U.S., Iran has played the largest role of a foreign actor in that conflict. Officially, Israel presents the attacks as preventing Iran from establishing a foothold in a neighboring country. Often the attacks, as is true today, have nothing to do with Iran's presence in Syria. All right, everyone, that's where I'm going to wrap it up for today. We'll have one more show this week on Friday. Be sure to follow me on Twitter. I have been doing a ton of work, and I'm writing these articles all day long and putting them out. I think I have 18 articles so far this week. So, again, at Anzalone _. Thank you all so much for all of your support, and we'll, again, be back with more episodes.